This lady just came up in my face and just said, "Have you found God yet?" And I said, "Nah, but I'm trying to find a taxi." Hello and welcome to the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and today we're going to be talking about a controversial subject, and I'm sure it's going to piss people off, but it's my show, so I would like to talk about it, and it's just in relation to myself, but it is the topic of religion as it refers to disabilities, because let's just say I've had some interesting experiences with this subject and I'll elaborate. But yeah, I can imagine this is probably going to annoy some people. But again, these are just my experiences, just my take on what's happened or my views on these kinds of things that have happened. So please bear that in mind. I'm not exactly trying to make generalized statements. I have my own thoughts about all this stuff, but I'm going to try and be as narrow focused as possible to make sure that it's just in relation to myself and what happened to me. I'm also very aware that other people with vision issues hold completely different opinions to this, and therefore I'm not speaking for everybody, but for me, this is an important discussion or chat. So let's get into it. All right, so religion helps a lot of people. I was religious. I was born and brought up in an Irish Catholic background, so you don't really have a choice. If you ask any other questions, it's just shut up, go to mass. God's the answer. Don't ask too many questions, basically. But you know, I went to Catholic school. I would say my prayers every night. I went to mass every Sunday. As far as I was aware, I was following the teachings, and the teachings of the church say good things happen to good people who believe and follow God's teachings and Jesus's teachings, and bad things happen to people who don't. So this became an issue when I lost my vision when I was 12, because the logical next step to bad things happen to bad people is I'm 12, I've lost my sight, or I'm losing my sight, ergo I must be a bad person. And this tore me up for, I'd say, 5 years. It wasn't until I was about 17 that I kind of went off on another path. But for about 5 years, religion wasn't a comfort for me. It actually made me feel worse about a situation I was already traumatized by, for lack of a better word. A particular big moment for me, I remember very vividly sitting in mass, and I think it was a sermon or a gospel about Jesus healing a blind man or something like that. And, you know, there's a very famous psalms and sayings, you know, ask and you shall be healed, all this kind of stuff. And again, like, I was 12, I had no doubts. As far as I knew, there was only a God, there was only a Christian God. I wasn't even exposed to anything else, so it's not like I was thinking otherwise, but I will come to that later. And so for me, I was kind of thinking, well, ask and you shall be healed. Well, I am asking. And if it happened to this person, and apparently it's happened to other people and miracles and stuff like that, then your mind goes to, well, why isn't it happening to me? As far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm aware of, as a child, I'm doing what I need to do to be following the right teachings, and this awful thing has happened. And again, when it doesn't happen, your next logical step is to go, well, it must be because I'm bad. It must be because I'm not worthy. And it became a real issue for me, because I realized that not only was I struggling with this really terrible thing of losing my vision and all the other things that kind of went along with that, with school and learning how to live life a different way and trying to deal with the grief of that. But then also I had this sort of moral, ethical conundrum going on in my head that was basically everything I'd learned in life told me that things like this only happen if you're a bad person and you aren't godly, therefore you must have made a mistake. And as I said, it probably was about 5 years of this going on and the turmoil going back and forth and hoping for a miracle and all this kind of things happening. And then eventually, I don't know what particularly happened, but I kind of came across the idea and other opinions that were basically saying, well, look, all the evidence suggests is that these kinds of things happen to people because it's genetics. It's random genetic mutation. It has nothing to do with your moral character. It has nothing to do with whether someone's good or bad. Like somebody doesn't get cancer because they're a good or bad person. They get cancer because they're susceptible to cancer. Or they might live in parts of the world where cancer is more prominent. It has nothing to do with them as a human being and whether they're moral or godly or not godly, because there's plenty of bad people where great stuff happens to them. So for me, it was that. And I was also eventually realizing as I got older, from my own sort of morality, what on earth could a 12-year-old do to ever warrant going blind? So either that's not true, or if that is true, that's a terrible setup and I want nothing to do with it. And on one hand, when I had this realization and found my own path and went off in a different non-religious direction, it was scary because that's all I'd ever known. But at the same time, it was also very freeing because I realized that nothing that had happened to me was because I was a bad person. And so in that way, it was very liberating and freeing because I had enough to deal with than my own mind kicking myself in the ass for the fact that maybe I caused myself to go blind. You know, I had enough on my plate than having to deal with that on top of everything else. As I said, I know other people who have disabilities or are blind or have had tough things in life, and they have the complete different opinion and perspective that it's a real source of comfort for them. But as I said, just in my own opinion and in my own experience, it wasn't a source of comfort. It was a source of more pain on top of the pain I was already experiencing. And I guess it coincided with me being that age. I was 17, so I was kind of at that age where you're starting to do things on your own. Whereas when you're younger, you know, nobody follows a religion or follows a group or a football team or anything when they're younger because they have made a choice to. They do it because they're told they have to, and everybody around them who they look up to says they must. So I guess once I got old enough to choose a team, I realized, one, I didn't want to choose a team because I didn't think there was a team to choose. But also it was somebody else's opinions or perspective or beliefs. It wasn't my own, and I wasn't getting anything particularly helpful out of the entire situation. And I guess the other big part of this, I mean, that's kind of the existential philosophical stuff. But the other big part of this, I guess, is also then when I lost my vision, the experiences I started to have out in the community but with people who are very prominently religious, which then took, in my view, just as a nastier kind of a tone. So I'll explain that now, because there's three main different experiences I would say I've had and how I categorize them. So I'll explain how they work and I'll explain the experiences I've had with them over my years. So the first encounter you have is people who say, look, just believe and pray and it'll all work out. It just comes down to as simple as that. They meet you on the street and they ask you about your blindness or whatever, or sometimes they don't even ask you, they'll just come up to you and say that in your face, and they just say, believe and pray and it'll all work out. That's the first kind of encounter I get. The second is, hey, well, if you're no longer religious, then why would God heal you? God won't heal you if you're not going to believe in him. So that's the second one I get to. And the third is, Well, if something bad happened to you, just confess, because bad things happen to bad people. Therefore, if you confess and repent for your sins that you've obviously committed, then you'll get your sight back. And I'm not bullshitting with these. These are the three main things that I get even to this day. So I'm going to explain some of the different examples now of those three different opinions and interactions I've had in relating to them. So the first example of somebody saying, well, if you just believe and pray, then it'll all work out, kind of negates the fact that you already have and you already were. So it kind of implies, well, you mustn't be doing it up to this point when you have. You've spent every night since your vision went or whatever doing this kind of stuff. And I remember one particular case where my mate and I, Blaine, we were walking through a shopping centre, and just out of the blue, this guy came up and started talking to Blaine. And I didn't know what he was saying, but he basically started telling my mate Blaine that he should read the Bible to me. And I got involved in the conversation because Blaine just sort of started laughing because this guy just came out of the blue, no hello, no anything. He just said, you should read your friend the Bible. And I said to him, like, mate, I have read the Bible. And he's like, oh, and didn't it work? Like, you can't see. And I said, well, yeah, exactly. It's but in his mind it was like, well, how could that be the case? Like, obviously you mustn't have read it good enough, or there must be something you're not doing if you're still blind. And I particularly remember this story because Blaine is a very funny man. Blaine decided that he would try and restore my sight there in the middle of the shopping centre. So he put his palm on my forehead and shouted at me to the devil be gone, and that's my for my vision to come back, because we were just finding it very amusing. But this guy was so adamant that somebody needed to read the Bible to me. Also, there are Braille Bibles, there are audiobook Bibles, so never mind the fact that I don't need somebody to read that to me in the first place. But that was the first kind of encounter, or typical encounter, I get for that first example of, well, just believe and pray, and then it'll all work out. The second example where somebody says, well, if you don't follow the teachings or if you're not religious anymore, then of course you're not going to get healed. And a really prominent example, which happens to me, I seem to get this happen a lot in taxis, where somebody brings up, hey, do you believe yada, yada, yada. A taxi driver wants to have a conversation even though you don't particularly want to. And they bring this up, and I like a good debate. I like a good philosophical debate about everything, really. But this particular guy that kind of encapsulates this, because it has happened many times, but this particular guy asked me, and I said, look, I'm not really religious anymore. And he goes, you see, that's the problem. And I was like, excuse me? He's like, well, if you're not religious anymore, then why would God give you your eyesight back? And that's just like a red rag to a bull to me, because I just think that's a very evil thing to say to somebody, because it to me, that's like a mafia boss. If you don't do what I say, then of course you're not going to get the goods. And I just find it really hard, especially because this person thinks that what they're doing is helping you. They think that they're giving you great information. In their mind, they're trying to help you. But what they are actually saying is, hey, this is a quid pro quo. If you don't do this, then of course you're not going to get helped by this being that's supposed to love everybody and be all powerful. And again, to me, I don't know, others will disagree, but to me, I find that concept pure evil. But nothing takes the cake for the evil factor except for this last example. So the third example is, I often get people telling me or saying to me in passing, hey man, don't worry, if you confess for your sins, you'll get your vision back. And I remember, for some reason, that these things always seem to happen around train stations. So I don't know if just certain types of characters hang around train stations, but I yeah, I've had this happen several times where I'd just be walking up and down the stairs, going to and from wherever I'm going, and somebody would just go past and go, "Hey man, God loves you. Confess, and you'll get your vision back. God bless you." And again, that person thinks that what they're saying is loving and moral and helpful. And again, basically what you're saying is, hey, you obviously did this to yourself. So confess for whatever it is you did to cause this bad thing to happen to you, and everything will be okay. And again, I'm like, what on earth could a 12-year-old child ever do to warrant going blind? And it's this kind of thing that actually, for me, caused a lot of problem. Now it kind of washes off my shoulder because I have a thicker skin for it. But I just think that this is kind of despicable. It's to me, it's just pure evil. There's no other word for it. It's evil to say that. It's kind of like somebody saying, "Hey, if your child isn't christened, then it doesn't get to heaven." Like, again, what on earth could an innocent, purest child who's never done anything to anybody, like the most perfect of things on this earth, if that little thing supposedly can't get into heaven, then what's going on? So again, to me, that's just pure evil. And for a while, it really kind of stung because it's just such a throwaway, terrible comment. But those are the three sort of main encounters I get. And I still do get them, but I try and have a sharp one-liner to sort of balance it off and bring the conversation to an end pretty quickly. So the other kind of encounters I often get people who come up to me and say, "Hey, don't worry, you'll get your life back when God returns. When Jesus returns, when the rapture comes, you'll get your life back." And I was kind of like, and I always say, I don't need a life to get back. I have a life. I mean, yeah, I'd love to drive a car and I'd love to be able to see again, but I have a life. But, in these people's minds, they can't compute that. So it's just that throwaway line, and it's not as bad as the others that I've explained. But again, you're like, what are you saying? Do you know anything about anything? You're just talking shit at a person, and you clearly know nothing. This actually is a funny one. I can't class it as a funny one, but I had an encounter again outside a train station, so there must be something to this, where I was walking towards a taxi rank, and this lady just came up in my face and just said, "Have you found God yet?" And I said, "Nah, but I'm trying to find a taxi." Because I think by that point, I just kind of gotten pretty quick to responding, and she wasn't happy at all. And I was like, I don't need this. I'm trying to get where I'm going. I don't need this. But that was probably one of my funnier comebacks. And the last two experiences I've had is I've had several people come up and ask me in public if they can pray for me. And even though that's not my jam, if somebody wants to do that, by all means, it's their life, it's their belief, it's important to them. If they think it's beneficial or if they feel okay about it, then by all means. So, and I welcome that somebody's thinking of me and cares. But I have had instances where somebody will come up to me and say, "Hey man, like, do you mind if I pray for you?" And I say, "Oh yeah, look, thanks. Okay, like, sure, if you want, thank you." And what they do is they pray there in front of me, at me, out loud in public, which again is really weird. I remember I was at the gym and I think I was just drying myself off with the towel. I was really sweaty. I was puffing, and this guy came up to me and was like, "Hey man, can I pray for you?" And I said, "Okay, sure, if you want to." And then he blessed me, blessed himself, and then prayed out loud. And the receptionist nearby could hear. And I was just like, this is fucking awkward. It's just very full on. And again, meant well, but just completely unnecessary in my book. And it just makes me feel like I'm a weirdo or a walking pity mat or something. Like I don't even know what it is, but it's just weird. And the last thing I get, which I know everybody gets, it's not just people with disabilities, but I think particularly people with disabilities or people who are seen to be a bit vulnerable, they get targeted by preachers or missionaries, maybe that might be out and about trying to recruit. And I have two stories with this. So the first is when I was at TAFE studying music, there was a gentleman who would be on campus trying to recruit, for the lack of a better word. And he had no time for any of my mates because my mates all loved death metal and they all were satanic kind of t-shirts, and they really played up the fact that they were evil whenever they saw him because they didn't want to have the conversation, even though they weren't bad guys. But, they were the typical, they must be demon spawn look about them because that's the way they dressed. So I didn't know this guy existed. And then this one day I was just waiting around for my mates, and this gentleman come and said hello to me. And he started kind of asking me about my vision and stuff like that. And he was really putting the hard sell on. And I was having I think a fairly civil debate with him. And I was just kind of saying, look, it's not really my thing. I've been there before. Fine for people who do, who do believe and do find comfort and solace from it. But just myself, that's not worked. And I've been down that road before. And I'm just not really interested. And then, unfortunately, even though this isn't blindness related, he made the big error of saying to me, because I was wearing an Irish football jersey or jacket, and obviously Ireland has a lot of sectarian, or has had a lot of religious problems between Protestants and Catholics. And he said to me, "Are you a green or an orange?" And I don't know about other Irish people. For me, again, that's like red rag to a bull. And I just sort of said to him, like, do you realize how many people have died over that question? And he backed up, but he saw me as an easy target because I was blind, and he thought, maybe this guy has a hole in his life he needs filled or something like that. But he asked the wrong question to the wrong person, and I gave it to him because even though I don't live in Ireland now, it's, I love the country and I know its history and stuff like that. And it was such to me, a manipulative conversation just to try and hook me somehow. And the last sort of preaching missionary experiences I had a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses who came and knocked on the door. And I think I was at uni at the time, so I'd have a lot of free time. And this had never happened to me before. I'd never experienced somebody knocking on the door who were looking to recruit, for lack of a better word. So that was very different. So I think I went to the door and I was in my boxers because it was probably like 2:00 in the afternoon. So naturally I was still having a sleep in my early mid-20s. But they came to the door and kind of starting having a conversation, and it started very, very peacefully. And I said, look, I'm not particularly interested. And they asked me why, and I sort of gave my reasons without going into it in too much detail because it's not particularly any of their business. But again, I do like a good discussion. And so they went off, and then the next time they came and they had like 3 more people with them. And they started having a conversation with me again, and they started to drop questions, and I can't really remember what they were, but they started to drop questions about, well, wouldn't you like your eyesight back? Or, kind of these implying these things about the rewards you might get for believing, or, well, if you don't believe, well, that's not really going to help your situation now, is it? And they're putting it on in a very nice sort of tone. But again, I was like, do you realize what you're saying is supposed to be helpful, but it's actually despicable? So it's those are those experiences. I mean, particularly with those guys, they kept coming back and wouldn't really take the hint, even though I was trying to be as polite as I could about it. So by the end of it, I would purposely just come to the door in nothing but my boxers. So I'd have like a 45-minute conversation with them at the door because I had nothing better to do. And I would just make a point of being in my boxers and nothing else, just to sort of make the conversation weird because I just weren't taking a hint. But yeah, those all of my experiences with all this can come under one of those categories. And again, as I said, I'm not recording this to intentionally piss people off or upset anybody, but it is something that happens. It's happened to quite a few people I know who are blind, and I'm sure for people who do believe, it's helpful. But for others who don't, or others from other religions or whatever, it's not helpful, and it actually causes more pain and more struggle than you already have to deal with. So I hope that was interesting. Again, don't mean anybody's offense, but you know what? It's a real situation. So if you're offended by a real situation, that's on you. But yeah, so I hope that was a little bit of insight into some of the stranger things that can happen. As always, you can get in touch with me by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. So if you look for @BlindsEyePod on Twitter, I'm Blindseyepodcast on Instagram and Blindseyepodcast on Facebook. And I also recently got myself a website, so just blindseyepodcast.com. So if you like what I do, if you like the episode, please subscribe, share, tell your friends. Any little bit helps. And I will speak to you next week. Cheers.